Good evening, everyone. We'll give it a couple more minutes just to have everyone join us before we get started. All right, looks like a few people are still joining a little bit, but we'll go ahead and get started with our introductions. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening for our Topanga Lagoon Restoration Project Preferred Alternative Proposed Final Environmental Impact Report presentation. My name is Barbara Tejada. I am the Cultural Resources Program Manager for California State Parks Angeles District. We'll be doing the presentation with a number of different panelists, and there'll be time for questions at the end. I'd like to start with introductions of the landowners for this, the three landowners for this project and the project representatives. So I'll call your name if you'd like to unmute and come on video and introduce yourself and say a little something, and then I'll introduce the next person. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Richard Fink, who's the California State Parks Angeles District Superintendent.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you everyone for attending this evening. We're really looking forward to receiving your feedback about this great project and beautiful Topanga State Park. My name is Richard Fink. I'm the District Superintendent for the Angeles District of State Park. We are the primary landowner for this project and really looking forward to hear what you have to say this evening. Thank you.
All right, next I'd like to introduce Anna Johnson with CalTrans District 7. Anna's environmental scientist with CalTrans.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Anna Johnson, and I'm here tonight on behalf of CalTrans District 7 Department of Environmental Planning, and thank you all for being here.
And then Portia Knowles, who is with the LA County Beaches and Harbors. She's a departmental facilities planner.
Good evening, everyone. As Barbara said, my name is Portia Knowles. I'm a departmental facilities planner with the County of Los Angeles Department of Beaches and Harbors. Topanga Beach is owned by the County of Los Angeles and managed by our department. I'm excited to hear all of your comments today. Thank you.
And finally, Clark Stevens, who's the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains Executive Officer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for attending. I see from the participant list, a lot of you have been with this project a long time. And also as principal architect on the project, I'm really excited for you all to see how your good, very specific comments and suggestions have been incorporated in the preferred alternative. So thank you for attending.
All right, I'd also like to recognize attendees from our local elected officials' offices. And if I don't call your name and you're in the group, please enter your information in the chat so we make sure to recognize you and your attendance. But we had confirmation from LA County Supervisor Lindsay Horvath's 3rd District Office with Zachary Geidzik, who's their Coastal and West Side Field Deputy. Also from the Office of Assembly Member Jackie Irwin, District Number 42, Nancy Frawley, the Deputy District Director. From the Office of State Senator Ben Allen, 24th District, Nick Ferries, who's the District Representative. And the Office of Congressman Brad Sherman, 32nd District, Sean Regan, Field Representative. As well as the Office of Assembly Member Jesse Gabriel from the 46th District, Jack Trent Dorfman and Clarissa Gomez, both field reps. And finally, the Office of the City of Los Angeles Councilwoman Tracy Park, 11th District, Michael R. Amster, the field deputy for Brentwood, Pacific Palisades, West LA area. And if there's anyone that's also attending that I've missed, again, please put your information in the chat so we can make sure to capture that. All right, let's go to the next slide. We'd also like to recognize and acknowledge the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory, the community of Topanga, where the water meets the rocks, now occupied by Topanga State Park, Pacific Coast Highway, and Topanga Beach. We honor the elders of the Tovangar communities, past and present, and their descendants who are members and citizens today of the Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California, the San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, and the Fernandinho Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that these tribes are still here, and we are committed to preserving their heritage, respecting their traditional knowledge, and lifting up their culture and community. And with that, I'll forward over to Tom Barnes, who will go over a little bit about the layout and the purpose of this meeting.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. Tom Barnes here with Environmental Science Associates. We supported state parks in the preparation of the environmental impact report. So again, we really appreciate everyone's attendance today. The purpose of today's meeting is really to continue the CEQA process and to look to the completion of the CEQA process. And so in so doing, we will review the project description and the purpose of the project, and then we will have a period of a public comment period to collect any input you might have on the final EIR that was sent to you for a 30-day review period. A big part of today's meeting is to share the selected preferred hybrid alternative that has been committed to by state parks. So again, we really wanted as an informational responsibility to review that preferred alternative in this forum. And then we will go over the next steps of the project implementation. So today we will have a 15 to 20-minute presentation on the preferred alternative, and then we will open it up to public comments if there are any today. We will be doing it in a virtual way. This is a webinar that we are on right now, so folks attending can't unmute themselves. And so we ask you to, when we get to that point at the end of the presentation, we will open it up for input from you. And you will go down and find the raise hand button and push that button, and I will be able to see your raised hand next to your name, and I'll call on you, and then we will have you unmuted for a comment. And we're going to try to stick to the 2-minute duration of comments if we can. And again, I'll go over those instructions again later as the meeting progresses. That's the raise hand button that you might have to move your mouse to be able to see as it comes up. Sometimes it hides. If you're joining by phone, there is another way to raise your hand, and that's by pressing *9. So next slide, I'm going to just provide a very brief overview of the California Environmental Quality Act process, CEQA process. And CEQA is a unique to California law adopted in 1970 that provides for public disclosure of projects, details, and impacts. It provides for a decision-making tool so that California public agencies have transparency in their decision-making process. It also sets up the ability to identify environmental impacts and incorporate mitigation strategies, mitigation measures to reduce those impacts. So it is a public act, again, unique to California, that does all that. We are in this color-coded flow chart in the orange right now. We've gone through the green, which was the initial scoping of input. That was done in 2022. We went back and wrote the EIR and published that EIR in February of 2024, and that's in the blue period. In that time, we had a couple public meetings that were held in person. And then when that review period closed, we moved to the orange part of this slide, which is the response to comments. We took comments seriously and provided a detailed responses to all the comments that we've received. In addition to that, we have identified a preferred alternative. The draft EIR did not identify a preferred alternative, but waited until the public had input to do so, had completed all the input that you did provide through that draft EIR process. So once we got through that, we have met as a project team, and State Parks has determined that there is a preferred alternative, and it's a hybrid alternative of what was alternative 2. It's a hybrid of all three, and we'll go into details about how that came to be. But the big part of this meeting today is as an informational responsibility to show in details the proposed project as committed to here. So with that, I think I will turn it back over to Barbara for continuing the presentation of purpose and need and project description.
Thanks, Tom. So just a little background, again, just the background on this project. We have a snapshot here of the location of the project. We're in the Topanga Lagoon, is the eastern gateway to the Santa Monica Mountains and the beaches out towards Malibu. We're working within the Topanga Creek watershed, which you'll see outlined on the right. The watershed is 18 square miles. It's the second largest watershed in the Santa Monica Mountains after the Malibu Creek watershed. It's got a relatively unaltered hydrology, and it's also significant as the last reproducing population of the steelhead trout in Santa Monica Bay. Next slide. So you'll see here the area in yellow is our area of project potential effects, so to speak. So the offshore area there in yellow is for proposed nearshore sediment nourishment. There's also extensions further down Pacific Coast Highway and up to Topanga Canyon Boulevard that were evaluated for wastewater treatment and processing. And this nearshore environment is on California State Lands Commission jurisdiction. The area in blue is under California State Parks, part of Topanga State Park. The area in pink on the beach is LA County Beaches and Harbors. And of course, CalTrans has the highway right in the middle. Next slide. So why are we doing this project? Well, so what we have here is a map from 1876. It's the earliest map known for the area with quite a bit of detail. This is what the mouth of Topanga Creek looked like back in those days. You can see in the blue, that's the actual water course. The light green would have been the wetted areas, the lagoon areas. And then the darker green is emergent vegetation, kind of the upper areas of the lagoon itself. note that the creek actually, the mouth of the creek trends to the east as the primary ocean current goes from west to east. Next slide. So here's one of the early photographs showing the mouth of Topanga Lagoon in 1916. You can see there's quite a large lagoon water body there in the middle. Could see a couple old cars on a dirt road. Note that there's a little farmstead right there on the corner. The road actually initially, what was called the old Malibu Road, went inland and around the backside of the lagoon and continued on up the coast. Next slide. So by about 1925, you can see that old Malibu Road extend towards the rear of the lagoon, and you'll see along highway bridge crossing the lagoon at the front. That was the Coast Road, completed in 1924, and connected Santa Monica up to Las Flores. Topanga started to become very well known for beach recreation. So you'll see a number of homes lining the beach itself, and the former Cooper's Auto Camp kind of in the center of that photo in a square arrangement. And next slide. And then things really changed after 1933 because the Malibu coast and Topanga coast was so popular for recreation. Almost immediately they needed to widen the highway. So in 1933, the California Division of Highways had a project to widen the highway into what was called Roosevelt Highway. And in the process of that, they kind of cut into the slopes that you can see kind of in the middle of the photo there. And then they have this extra fill that they had to do something with. They ended up dumping up to 60% of the produced fill from that widening into the lagoon. So you can see in that photo right in the center, there's kind of this area of more recent fill deposits and a much narrower bridge across the mouth of the creek. So why is this project important? Topanga Lagoon is really the last refuge for a couple of different endangered fish species. The first is the tidewater goby. They prefer a freshwater lagoon. There's a really healthy population documented for Topanga, but they do need a refuge from storm flows. And so with that constriction of the creek mouth that was created by putting in all that fill material, it kind of creates a fire hose effect during storms when the creek is running. So that's not great for the gobies. It can wash them all out. And of course, Topanga Creek is also really important for the steelhead trout. They have an anadromous life cycle, which means they go from the ocean to freshwater. The only reproducing population in the Santa Monica Mountains is here in Topanga Creek. So this is a key to species survival at this location because this southern steelhead is, better able to handle higher temperatures, water temperatures that we'll be probably having with climate change. And so if we can keep this trout, we could save that species. And there's needed improvements for fish passage here at Topanga Creek. Next slide. Another part of the project is to protect Gabrielino Tongva cultural sites, including the ethno-historic village of Topanga, which was documented here at the mouth of the lagoon. So we are looking at providing some interpretation of that heritage as part of this project and to protect any impacts to those resources. We also have historic resources on site. I mentioned earlier the Cooper's Camp, which was originally built in the 1920s. Once that fill was put in, all those little cabins were moved and rearranged and eventually became the Topanga Ranch Motel, which is still on site, and it's eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. So this project also looks at determining the future of some of these historic period structures. And then there's the recreational and coastal access needs. As you're driving past this area, there's no indication that the inland side of PCH is part of Topanga State Park. There's one little trailhead, not very visible, not very welcoming. But on the beach side, it's a very popular beach with 1 million beach visitors per year estimated. But there are some limited visitor services there. Next slide. On the beach side, we are seeing more and more impacts from storm damage, beach loss. The lifeguard and restroom building right there on the beach is, you know, the waves are crashing right up against it during high tide events, and this is likely to continue and be exacerbated. Next slide. And finally, the emergency services barriers. So there is a helicopter landing zone on the west side of the creek, yet the lifeguard station and the road access is on the east side of the creek. And if the creek mouth is open to the ocean, this creates an issue with access across the, you know, across the sand and across the wetted area. So we're looking at making emergency services more efficient and, you know, by siting helicopters with areas with the lifeguard station and the road access. And with that, I will pass it over to John Oda with California State Parks.
Thank you, Barbara. As she mentioned, my name is John Oda. I'm an environmental scientist with Angeles District of State Parks. And so the project team took the needs that Barbara just enumerated and then received public input in the form of several design charrettes and also the best available science from our technical advisory committee, which was made up of numerous regulatory and scientific agencies that were concerned about the overall project needs. This resulted in the overall goal of expanding and restoring the lagoon ecosystem, integrating public access, recreation, and visitor serving needs, and proactively addressing sea level rise while still protecting existing biological, cultural, and recreational resources. And this led to a number of specific project goals broken up, next slide, please, into ecological components, which you can see listed out here, and then as well as recreational, next slide, please, sorry. And then as well as recreational and access goals. And then a range of project alternatives were created and considered in the draft environmental impact report. These all kind of met the same overall goals that were identified, but they tended to emphasize specific aspects. Now, the first alternative that was considered in the DEIR was alternative 1, which was no project. It is required by CEQA that no project be considered in any analysis. And just to orient folks to the site, if they're not familiar with it, here you see PCH, the top of the photo is north, the bottom of the photo is south. You can see the Topanga Beach and the lifeguard structures and parking that will be referenced. The knoll to the east that's very close to the shoreline. And then barely visible in the top of the photo is the state park's parking lot for the Topanga Ranch Motel, just to give you a little bit of orientation when we get to future slides. Now, under alternative 1, the status quo would be remained and all of the project needs identified previously would continue to be problems. Now, if we move on to the project alternatives in which a project occurs, so 2, 3, and 4, there are a lot of common elements because, again, they're all intended to address the same overall project goals. So they all involve a longer PCH bridge over the lagoon of a similar length to improve fish passage. They all include an expanded and restored lagoon ecosystem ranging from 7 to 10 acres, development of new visitor services, one concession retained to serve public visitors, and improvements to existing wastewater systems and emergency service upgrades. And I just want to note one component of that we might touch on later is also that the current Knoll Landing site is used for emergency medical evacuations, but can't serve wildfire fighting helicopters. And the intention is that any helipad that is installed will be FAA approved and able to accommodate those larger wildfire fighting helicopters. So it'll be a nice local asset. So moving on to just describe the project alternatives. Alternative 2 can be thought of as maximizing the lagoon. In this, both the east and west bank, the historic fill of PCH, which Barbara mentioned, is removed, bringing it back to a more natural grade. This creates the largest wetland area at about 10 acres. Because the fill is removed on the east side of the creek, this results in the loss of the historic Topanga Ranch Motel. So this would be a impact that was found to be an unavoidable impact in the DEIR analysis. Some other things to note with this, some other things to note with this alternative is the helipad is closer to a beach elevation and not on the same level as PCH or the parking lot. This will come up again when we discuss the overall alternative hybrid that we developed. And then also I want to point out on the corner of Topanga Canyon Boulevard and PCH, what we call the Gateway Corner, a relatively undeveloped open space with some visitor parking and an interpretive pavilion and a few buildings, small outbuildings to support parks operations. This is fairly similar under all alternatives, so I'm not going to be addressing it too much, but really helps improve that visitor access and awareness issue that Barbara highlighted. So moving on to the next slide. So alternative 3 could be thought of as maximizing the historic resources on the site. In this, the Topanga Ranch Motel is retained, so lagoon expansion is really only on the western side of the creek. This limits the overall lagoon expansion to 7 acres as opposed to 10. Another thing to note is that while the Topanga Ranch Motel is retained, the western slope, the western edge of that motel, it was anticipated that a few units would be removed because that slope is slowly being undercut and there was stability issues. That is another thing to keep in mind when we come to the discussion of the hybrid alternative, because that ended up playing a role in our final decision. And then finally, we have alternative 4, which could be thought as maximizing sea level rise resilience. In this, the key difference is not the length of the bridge, it remains the same length, but the alignment of PCH is moved north. There's a more exaggerated curve. And what this allows is more room south of PCH, which allows for a more sandy beach area and also for beach infrastructure to move further inland and thereby providing the most resiliency to predicted sea level rise. A few things came up in the development as we were moving forward with publishing the DEIR, which is that record searches and surveys of the site determined that there were some tribal artifacts close to the surface that would be in the path of the PCH realignment, which would mean there would be impacts to those if we change the alignment of PCH. And then also it became clear that there was going to be retaining walls, which would be necessary under this alternative. And construction of those retaining walls brought some landslide and slope stability concerns, which would complicate the geotechnical realities of this alternative. So to briefly summarize, the DEIR found that all alternatives had temporary impacts from construction. These included things like temporary disruptions to PCH, even though we would be keeping all 4 lanes of traffic open, there would be some temporary impacts, things like noise and dust and just temporary impacts to the accessibility of the beach recreation. We outlined a number of mitigation measures to try to limit those temporary impacts as much as possible, which were also included in the DEIR. It was found that there were significant and unavoidable impacts in 2 alternatives, which was alternative 2 for the removal of the ranch motel and alternative 4 for the impacts to tribal cultural resources close to the surface in the realignment of PCH. And because of this, the environmentally superior alternative was deemed to be alternative 3 because it avoids significant unavoidable impacts. Of note, as Tom mentioned, the selection of a preferred alternative was deferred in the DEIR until the landowners received public and regulatory comments and focused, we specifically asked for public preference on which alternative they'd like to see. And we did receive those public comments. So we had a 60-day comment period, which is an extension on the 45-day typical comment period, and really the limit to what's allowed under CEQA. We received over 100 comments from both private individuals, interested NGOs, resource regulatory agencies, and local, state, and federal entities. And there were a couple of key takeaways. One was that there's majority support for project to proceed. Out of all the comments we received, approximately 10% were supportive of alternative 1, no project, and approximately 60% were in favor of either alternative 2 or alternative 3. There was a strong public preference for maximizing the natural resources. 50% of all comments received cited a preference for alternative 2. And there was no support expressed for alternative 4, either due to potential impacts or just less public priority on the benefits that alternative offered. But we didn't receive any comments supportive of alternative 4. Next slide, please. So further summary, again, there was a clear preference for maximizing restoration acreage where possible. And the overall goal that resonated most was the preservation of the steelhead and our coastal wetlands in general. However, there was interest in motel restoration and public use opportunities. A lot of that interest came in the form of people who were suggesting ways that space could be used. A very common refrain we heard is that the overall project area is kind of a key gathering site for the local communities and, kind of just a public hub where people can come and meet each other, and a hope that some element of that can be retained either in the concession that is retained or in a public meeting space in the motel area. There were the most common recreational issue raised was the surf break, both preserving the surf break and also just maintaining access, as well as some hydrology, flooding, and beach erosion concerns. So addressing the surf concerns, this was something the project team was working to address previous to the release of the DEIR, but we did receive those comments. And we worked with surfers represented by Friends of Topanga Point, as well as surfers who were joining in the discussion on their own. And we decided the best path forward was to retain a surf consultant at the project team's expense, but agreed to by both Friends of Topanga Point and the project team. And they would take the hydrological modeling of the project area, which our hydrologists had already constructed, take feedback from local surfers on what really made this beach special, ride length, the way it braked, what conditions were really the best days, and then do modeling to determine is there a potential for this project to really change those factors that the surfers love. You can get more detail. There was a meeting in which the consultant released their findings, which you can find at the Topanga Lagoon Restoration.org website. But the overall findings were that because the project is grading, back of the beach face, we're not grading on the beach, and starting at the outer edge of the creek and not affecting the cobble delta that is found at the mouth of the lagoon. Really, a lot of the natural variability present in the system is such as, weather, sea level rise over time is going to have a much greater impact than anything from this project. That said, the consultant did find there is the potential for a slight worsening conditions in the immediate aftermath of the project as some of the sediment works its way out of the changes to the system. But within about 5 years, any of those impacts should be completely overshadowed by just the natural variability. And then moving on to the hydrology and flooding concerns. There were two principal concerns. One for the potential changes to the creek channel and lagoon mouth to move westward and flood adjacent properties. And then also a general concern that removal of the knoll or some of the buildings that act as beach infrastructure would cause increased erosion or prevent deposition and cause the beach to really scour and become much smaller. So just to speak to this chart, this is a FEMA flood map with the project areas hatched. And it was found that there would not need to be any changes to this FEMA flood map due to project activities. And I should mention, if you want more detail on what I'm covering now, please look in the DEIR section 3.19, hydrology and water quality, as well as chapter 2 of the final EIR in the master hydrology response. The project hydrologist really gets into a lot of detail about these concerns. So moving on to the next slide, when it comes to concerns over the creek shifting, very quickly, this map, the dark blue line is the current thalweg or deepest part of the creek on average. The medium blue is where our project team believes the thalweg will end up based on the elevation changes made as part of the project. And then the lightest blue is the westernmost possible migration of the creek as determined by our hydrologist. And there's a couple of things driving this. One is a cobble delta, which I touched on for the surf study. And that drives a lot of the dynamics in the system and is not being changed. And the ocean current, again, runs west to east, which has a very large influence on how the mouth opens and develops, and we're not changing those ocean currents. And additionally, this is not just a hollowing out of a channel completely flat and then very large cliffs. There is going to be a natural gradient to allow for things like different plant communities and such. And between those natural elevation gradients, armoring along the bridge abutments that will be in place and retain land, there's really just not a physical way for the thalweg to shift all the way over into the adjacent properties. Yes, and next slide, please. And so touching on the beach erosion concerns, these come in a number of different concerns based on the individual, but there's this public beach area to the west. There is the general longer beach to the east. Some folks are worried that the public beach area to the west will stop accreting sand if this knoll in blue is removed. Some folks are worried that the beach will begin to scour if the lifeguard building that is partly visible is removed. And what our hydrologists found is that the shoreline position is really not affected by the knoll, which you can kind of see in these slides. You know, the beach line, there's no clear change once you get past the knoll, once you get past the lifeguard station. There's not more deposition or more scour in certain areas. And I think this is very well demonstrated by, on the next slide, the shore changes over time. Our hydrologists did a historical study, and what you see is a series of photos. The first on the left is from 1928, the center is from 1940, and the one on the right is from 1947. And in the first two, that knoll that's identified as a potential anchor point is not present. In the last one, it is. There's a number of buildings that are added and removed, and you know, in the end, after these pictures were taken, the majority of these buildings were removed, and the overall beach shape, the overall tendency for the lagoon mouth to go to the east, all remain unchanged. And you know, the sea level rise that is predicted over the coming decades is just a bigger threat than any sort of impacts that this project is going to have. And with that, I will hand it off to Jamie King from RCD to discuss our preferred alternative selection.
Hello, everybody. So glad you all have the chance to be here to hear about the updates on this project. As John mentioned, I'm Jamie King, work with the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains. My role at the RCD is as a senior conservation biologist. But more importantly, I've been co-leading the grant management, project management of this project with my colleague, Rosie Daggett, to help all of the landowners and the RCD come together to try to put forward the best project possible to meet the project goals and needs. So I'm going to share with you today the results of those discussions. So as John shared, you know, the preparation of the draft environmental impact report was a 2-year process where we put forward many alternatives, the best ideas that we had based on feedback from the public at various charrettes and meetings. The document went out to the public for a 60-day period, got 100 comments back. So the landowners and the RCD got together in late April and May after all of the public comments and regulatory comments come back and said, let's look at these closely to get input on what's going to be the best alternative for this project. Knowing, and there was intentionality to that. You know, state parks has decided they really wanted to hear from the public and the regulatory agencies before coming up with a final decision to really try to hear all perspectives and views. So kind of the low-hanging fruit is, were there any big problems that were obvious with any of these project alternatives? And the one that was probably the most challenging was alternative 4. And as John showed you in previous slides, that's the alternative where the Pacific Coast Highway was shifted to the north and would affect the existing state park parking lot and the footprint of the structure that's currently used as the Real Inn. Because there are tribal resources in that general area, that realignment of the Pacific Coast Highway would have significant and unavoidable impacts on tribal resources, which is a very big concern. Also, CalTrans and the project engineers continue to look closely at the engineering. We're moving into the more detailed design phases now. And some of the concerns that came up is with that shift to the Pacific Coast Highway, large retaining walls would be needed on both the east and the west side up against the bluffs to make sure we're not having landslide issues impeding onto the Pacific Coast Highway and our daily commuter traffic. And they just had some serious reservations with the geotechnical concerns and the costs and feasibility issues associated with that. Next slide. So in terms of other processing considerations, state parks look closely, as well as the project team, on what wastewater options were available to the project. As you may recall, there were 3 options that were shared in the DEIR. The first one was to extend the county sewer line that was a mile to the east at Coastline Drive and extend it down the Pacific Coast Highway to connect and serve the project. The challenges with that, similar to the alternative 4, is that there were geotechnical and environmental concerns with that, specifically because we're here on the edge of the coast. We anticipate that shallow groundwater would be encountered, requiring some very expensive methodologies to put in a pipeline. Also trying to get a pipeline that had the sufficient grade. Also, the adjacent bluffs have landslide issues that were of concern. And finally, the sewer option would likely require a closure of one lane of traffic for at least some portion of the additional year of construction, which would obviously have significant effects on the commuting public and visitors. So for those and many other reasons, the sewer line was considered to have serious challenges. Of the two on-site, excuse me, on-site wastewater treatment options that were considered, one was a subsurface drip irrigation or SDI option, which if you imagine, drip irrigation that you might have at your house, but instead it's down depth. This was considered north of the project site along Topanga Canyon Boulevard, but the area available and the soils were problematic, and it would believe that if an SDI option was chosen, it would only be able to support a project alternative that did not involve any motel at all or any use of the motel for public benefits. And for that reason, it was considered limiting and didn't provide services to whatever alternatives ultimately selected. So that left us with the seepage pit option. And that was what is chosen because it can support any project alternative. It's located on state parks property, and there are sufficient areas where it can be located to support any development option, as well as be buffered away from any sensitive resources. When the county looked at the project for their property and the different alternatives that were considered, there was some real benefits that they saw for alternative 2, specifically associated with the helipad. The helipad under alternative 2 is located closer to the beach level. And as a result, there would the parking lot, which is at a higher elevation, and the Pacific Coast Highway, which is at a higher elevation, would be buffered. I mean, you can imagine when the helicopter's coming down and the rotors are spinning, sand is going to fly everywhere. So by having it located separate from those facilities, there's more protection and buffer for visitor services. Also, it's at an elevation that's more accessible for the lifeguards. Next slide, please. Another key consideration were issues associated with alternative 2. Alternative 2, which would fully remove the Ranch Motel, is a concern, primarily because the Topanga Ranch Motel is eligible to be on the National Register of Historic Places. It's an example, I believe it's only one of 2 in California, of the 1930s auto court. It has a really unique triangular shape. And if you can imagine, there's still some auto courts around that are older, that are more recent. You can drive right in, park your vehicle right next to your motel unit and go in and enjoy your stay. There aren't a lot of those left from that era. So this is a pretty unique example of that. There are statutory requirements to make sure that any impacts to National Register of Historic Places eligible structures are minimized. So full removal obviously doesn't meet that standard. And also, finally, State Parks' core mission, I think of it as a threefold. It's about protecting cultural resources, it's protecting natural resources, it's also providing outstanding recreation opportunities. So when we're considering those 3 issues, you really have to consider the importance of the cultural resources on site. And unfortunately, alternative 2 doesn't do that as well as with the full removal of the Ranch Motel. Next slide, please. Also, there are ongoing environmental conditions. John touched on that the motel fill pad, although consisting of native soil, has been slowly getting eroded on the west end right next to the creek. And this year was especially obvious about the fragility of that area. We saw that during the storms this spring, that a chunk of that western edge got eroded and resulted in one of the structures falling into the creek. So that's going to be a problem in the future. And so one thought is, if we utilize the smaller motel footprint in the restoration and have a greater buffer between the creek edge and the motel and all the visitor serving uses that would occur there, it would be a long-term benefit for the project. It allows the natural resources to have a larger buffer from the noise, light, and activities of people. It allows the people to have a larger buffer from the resources so that any maintenance of the facility aren't affecting them, and would allow a more manageable project with less impacts to both sides in the long run. Next slide, please. So in summary, as you might expect, all of the DEIR build alternatives have challenges, and that's not unusual. There's no perfect silver bullet solution to any project. The three alternatives that were put forward were very similar in nature. They met all of the project goals, but each of them has strengths and weaknesses. So when looking at that, what the main items were that alternatives 2 and 4 both result in significant and unavoidable impacts to historic and tribal resources as is. Alternative 2, by removing the motel, affects historical. Alternative 4, by shifting the PCH north and affecting tribal resources, affects tribal resources. And then when you look at alternative 3 and 4, both of those alternatives retains some footprint of the motel, which that's great. We're preserving cultural resources. But on the downside, you have fewer acreages of native habitat retained. So there's a balance there. And state parks and all the project partners had consensus that whatever alternative was selected, it really needed to meet the main project goals and needs, and which are 1, to avoid significant and avoidable impacts, 2, to meet natural and cultural resource protection goals, and finally, to make sure that we're improving coastal access, addressing sea level resiliency, and improving visitor services opportunities for the long term. Next slide. So let's take a look at what the team came up with. We came up with a hybrid alternative that takes the best elements of all of the alternatives identified in the EIR. And we call this preferred hybrid alternative 3A, or balanced resource protection. Just to orient you on what you're seeing in this graphic, on the upper left is a focus view of the project boundary that's in green. I like to say it's a goose sitting on a suitcase. But to the right, we have a close-up of the main area of the project. You're also seeing the green project boundary. What's the purple polygon represents, that shading represents the lagoon restoration that would occur. That includes areas that would be basically reshaped to have a more natural contour. And you notice there's a big gray empty stripe in the middle of the purple, and that's actually the lagoon proper. One thing we like to emphasize is, similar to all of the project alternatives, this preferred hybrid alternative 3A will start work on the edges of the lagoon and creek and work back, so that we're really trying to do no harm and disturbance to the habitat that's so sensitive and so precious. So for areas south of Pacific Coast Highway in pink, which is Topanga Beach, we basically see that we've included alternative 2 in this hybrid alternative. So we see the helipad at the beach level, and all other elements are what you see in alternative 2. For the Pacific Coast Highway in orange, that is the same as alternative 2 and alternative 3. Basically, the alignment is the same. The only difference is that we have a longer bridge that spans a total of 460 feet instead of a really minuscule 79 feet. And then north of the Pacific Coast Highway in the blue area, which is California State Parks, Topanga State Park, we are mainly implementing alternative 3. What we're seeing with that is that the parking lot and the footprint of the building that's used as the real inn do not change. All of the improvements on the gateway corner are the same as you see in alternative 3. The one single difference is that the motel, we're utilizing the much smaller footprint of alternative 4 to accomplish 2 things. 1, to maximize as much lagoon habitat acreage restoration, as we can, while still retaining the cultural resources and protecting the cultural resources. And 2, to create a greater buffer between the creek and the motel area for the benefit of both the cultural, public access, and natural resources. Next slide. These 2 graphics show a little more detail about the preferred alternative. On the left, we see a close-up of the gateway corner, which will be this interface between urban areas to the east and west, and this one of the largest urban natural parks in the United States, Topanga State Park. They'll include in blue, the blue little polygon is a visitor pavilion and restroom, and the green is going to be kind of a very wooded, natural open space that transitions into the adjacent state park areas. And that yellow polygon that you see on the left graphic is the new parking that's going to be created to allow more visitor usage and more easier access to that area of the beach directly to the south. The graphic on the right depicts what sort of benefits there'll be to available beach area with this preferred hybrid alternative. Similar to all of the project alternatives, we're going to gain roughly an acre of additional sand space that could be used for additional towel space for recreation, or it could be used for creating additional living dunes if that's of interest of the project. Next, please. And this graphic shows what the wastewater management options will look like for the preferred alternative. The blue line that you see represents the pipeline that will provide a connection between the creator of effluent and wastewater, which will be the restroom facilities and the motel area, and then goes all the way up north a half a mile along the edge of Topanga Canyon Boulevard in a pretty disturbed area, and will cross over to the east side of Topanga Canyon Boulevard to that area you see in orange, which historically was developed. There are no buildings on it now, but you can see that there's a history of disturbance on the site because it's primarily dominated by weeds and invasive trees, although there are a scattering of native trees around the edges. And so our field testing through our consultants showed that this is a really great area to accept wastewater because there's enough area, we're not disturbing any important natural resources, and there's a significant buffer from the creek to the west. Next slide. This graphic gives an overview of really where work and disturbance is occurring in the project area as a whole for this preferred alternative. Again, you see the green boundary of the project. Just want to emphasize the suitcase looking shape in the ocean is the area where some sort of nearshore nourishment will occur. The exact zone within it that would be utilized has not been defined to date. That will be dictated by our regulatory partners at CDFW, California State Lands Commission, Coastal Commission, NOAA, and others. And the goal being is we really want to place that material in the right place to maximize its distribution to benefit those beaches to the south and down current, but also make sure we're not placing anything on any sensitive resources. So there's been 2 years of marine studies done to date that are influencing those decisions. And we're going to be having a series of conversations in the design phase with our regulators on what the best location will be. The other hatching that you see within the project boundary represents areas where disturbance would occur either through development of a parking lot or the motel, or through other facilities. The purple again represents the lagoon restoration. Next slide. And this final graphic, I love. It basically is a visualization based on a 1935 aerial photo that shows on the left what the footprint of the lagoon and adjacent riparian areas today. You see it's very narrow, very constrained. There's only a 79-foot wide bridge that this lagoon can pass through. And that's its history over time. It represents what's happened to most lagoons in California for the last 150 years. They've been disappearing. Under the preferred hybrid alternative 3A, we're basically getting, although not the full 9.5 acres that you might get in alternative 2, but we're getting really close. We're getting over 7.5 acres. And I think that 2 acre difference, although we're getting 2 acres less than you might get under alternative 2, what we are getting is retention of a significant portion of the Topanga Ranch Motel for the benefit of preserving not only our past history, but providing opportunities for the public to learn about it and opportunities for the public to learn more about this important area and have access to it. And so for that reason, we've been thinking of this hybrid alternative as the balanced resource protection option. Next, please. One last thing. So we are going to be deep diving into design upon completion of the current environmental phase. But during this process, CalTrans conducted a value added analysis, which they're required to do under their guidelines for any projects that exceed over, $25 million. And the intent of that is to really have impart an external peer review and impart a deep dive on the initial design of the project to see if there's any obvious and clear improvements that could be made that could be considered more detailed, during the design process. And so in March, the CalTrans engineering team, led by Moffitt and Nickel and their consultants, as well as representatives from the landowners and the RCD, met for an intensive week to look at the designs and discuss how this project might be able to be improved. And there were 3 key recommendations that came out of that process. Next slide, please. The first one, when you look at the supports for the piers on the bridge, currently the design has been considering having 1 column per support. But the engineers are like, it's much less expensive if you do 2 smaller supports, and it'll be easier to get a greater range of contractors willing to do that work. And so when the environmental team considered that, as well as the hydrologists, they didn't see any downside to that approach. So this concept is going to be looked at as a possible option in more detail during design. So that's the first recommendation. The second recommendation, oops, can you go back a slide? Thank you. Are shown in the upper left graphic. And here we're seeing what is functionally a wider bridge by about 38 feet. And what's that about? In the EIR, the 3 alternatives identified that during construction of the bridge and its expansion from 79 feet to 460, that there would need to be a temporary secondary bridge built for traffic to utilize so that no lanes of traffic were shut down during construction. The engineer said another and possibly better approach is to look at stage construction, work with a wider bridge, and shift traffic to different portions of it while you're working on other portions. So this eliminates the need for a whole separate structure with a footprint of disturbance, and would likely cut construction down by 6 months, which has obvious benefits to the commuters and the visitors. And then the lowest graphic on the left shows the third recommendation that the CalTrans and engineering team came up with, and it's about the approaches to the bridge. The bridge itself, the new bridge, would be 200 feet, and the side approaches, the side spans, would range between 120 and 140 feet. And the engineer said, well, why don't you make those exactly the same length? It's much more cost effective and easier for a contractor to manage, and there should be significant cost savings. The hydrologists and biologists looked at that and they said, okay, we actually don't see any problem with that. That seems like a good recommendation to consider in the design phase. And so that's the third recommendation. Next slide. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rosie Daggett, who has been involved in this project for the last 25 years.
Thanks so much, Jamie. So where are we now and what happens next? My name's Rosie Daggett. I'm a principal conservation biologist for the RCD of the Santa Monica Mountain. And I've been working on this restoration with many of you for over 20 years. And now we are getting to the close of the review period for the final environmental impact report. State parks will take whatever comments are submitted between now and the 13th of August, and will hopefully finalize the environmental impact report by the end of August or early September. We have funds in hand, thanks to former Assembly member Richard Bloom, to take the bridge roadway design and the lagoon excavation design through to 90% completion and permitting. And so the next steps are to begin that process of refining the design for the bridge and roadway. We have applied for funds to carry the visitor serving elements for both the state park side and the county side to run concurrently. And what's important about all of this is that as each step of the milestone, what we'll be doing is inviting public participation in design charrettes to help us refine this in the best way we possibly can. And so if you're interested in continuing your contributions to the project design, please make sure that you are signed up so that you get that information. We anticipate having a design charrette for the 30% level sometime this fall. So that's in the work, in the immediate. After we do jump through all those hoops and get all the designs and permits completed, that is hopefully going to end in December of 2026 or early 2027. And we will be seeking funds to implement the project during the design phase. We won't have a cost estimate available to share with anyone till we get to around 65% design, because it's at that point that things are significantly moved along so that you can actually create a really tight and reasonable cost estimate. So I just want to say that after that, we'll go to construction, and after that, there'll be monitoring to see if we are actually hitting all the goals that we identified as the project needs. One really important thing, next slide, is that you can remain involved in this as we go. And we would really encourage you to do that. This project has benefited greatly from the input that you guys have provided all along the way. And our intention is to continue that conversation. So please make sure that you get on the contact list, and you can always email us at topangalagoonrestoration.com. Next slide. So I want to conclude the webinar by handing out a huge thank you. This has been a long and crazy journey to get this project to where we are today. And it wouldn't have happened without landowners, state parks, beaches and harbors, and CalTrans working together really closely and collaboratively to make this all work. And again, funding that was provided by the State Coastal Conservancy and through grants administered by California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Wildlife Conservation Board. But really, when it gets down to it, this whole project works because of so many people like you who have participated. So I just want to thank you again for all of the time and energy you've contributed over this long time period. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Tom, and we're hoping to hear your comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosie and project team, for that presentation. We'll now go into the second part of our meeting, which is to open up the opportunity for the attendees here to provide their comments on what they saw today and on their review of the final environmental impact report. Again, in order to do that, we ask in this webinar format that you find the raise hand button. Sometimes you have to move your mouse for the menu to come up at the bottom of your screen, but it will come up and it's in the middle of your screen at the bottom. And you can press that raise hand and we'll see it on our screen, and then we will call out your name that shows up on your ID in your email or your address. We ask that you limit your time to 2 minutes, and that you only provide one set of comments if you can, and we'll try to stick to that. We also ask that you state your name and if you have any affiliation that you're representing at today's meeting, if you do that for us as well. I need to make sure that everyone recognizes this meeting is being recorded. So we will have a record of your comment through that recording process. And then by phone, again, if you want to raise your hand and you're on phone, press *9 and we will see a hand next to your name. So with that, I think that we are ready to go, and I see that there are some hands raised. And so, Stephen, if we're ready, I'll go ahead and call out the name. And then if you could provide us some input, that would be great. And we'll have a timer for you too. So to start with, it looks like Gilbert Dembo.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Yes.
Thanks, Gilbert.
I have two questions, sir. You said you have over 1 million visitors right now to the beach, Topanga Beach. How many parking places will be added to accommodate those visitors? right now it looks like you're cutting the parking to the beach in half. The other question I had is, how much is the total cost of this project? And you must have some eyeball estimate going to be. How many millions of dollars will go into this project, including the wasted time for the visitors, people living in Malibu? Could you please answer? Thank you.
Sure. Rosie Daggett, do you want to answer the cost one, and I can key on the parking?
Sure. At this point in time, we really don't have a full cost estimate because the visitor services program, what exactly the Ranch Motel is going to do and how these are all going to fit together has not been finalized because that's part of the design process going forward. So we'll be happy to share that with you when we get to the 65% level and we actually have some real cost estimates that we can share. Thank you.
And I don't know if we can flick back to say like one of the graphics from alternative 2 or 3, but to answer your question about the parking, one thing you'll see when you look at the alternative graphics and for alternative 3A is that there is new parking that is created in a couple areas. First of all, on the west side of the project, south of the Pacific Coast Highway, there's a new developed parking lot that doesn't exist, that's not in use. So that will provide some parking spots. There's going to be additional parking also on the east side, north of the Pacific Coast Highway, along Topanga Canyon Boulevard, within what we've been calling the Gateway Corner. The third thing is, so although there may be some a little bit less parking within the parking lot for Department of Beaches and Harbor, with those other lots, we're actually getting equal or slightly greater gain in parking. If indeed it's determined that a wider bridge makes sense to avoid this temporary bridge during construction, that there would also be additional new free parking along the PCH on the north side of the highway. And then we have a series of trails that go underneath the Pacific Coast Highway that will provide improved movement of folks through the site safely across the PCH or under the PCH compared to the existing. So definitely recognizing that access to the beach is a concern and parking is a concern. And the preferred alternatives outline is providing some improvements.
Okay, thank you, Jamie and Rosie, for those responses. Let's go now to Susan Nisman. And again, if you could state your name and if you have an affiliation, just we have it for the record. Thank you, Susan.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good evening all, and congratulations to all for this, the duration and the passion. My affiliations go way back. Right now as a private citizen living in Topanga for almost 50 years. I have 2 questions. I was not clear on this hybrid that you said something about losing 2.5 acres of habitat and beach expansion. I didn't know if those 2 were combined from what was initially proposed in alternative 2, which was what 50% had of the majority of people who had commented preferred. Could you dissect that a little bit more for me so I can understand? And this is all to preserve an old ranch historical site instead of habitat. I'm just trying to figure out what the exchange is here and what's lost.
Sure. John, do you want to field that?
All right, yes. So yes, and again, as noted, we are aware that this was strong majority support. This was the primary benefit that people were focused on, and it is approximately a 2.5 acre reduction. So right now we're at 0.5 acre of wetland. And the hybrid alternative we're targeting is about 7 to 7.5 acres. So it is about 2.5 acres smaller than alternative 2, which would have been the maximum lagoon. And yes, we are, especially state parks felt it was necessary to make this trade-off. Again, because we have a range of objectives and goals that are identified in our mission. Our mission is to preserve not only the natural resources of the state, but the cultural, historical, and recreational resources. And our internal discussions among the districts, you know, I'm an environmental scientist. This is where I tend to go, would be for the endangered species. But when we have, you know, this is a 1920s auto court. There's only 2 remaining. So if we lose this one, there's only 1 remaining that's substantially unaltered. You know, from a landscape management perspective, you know, we have to think, if we remove this thing that, you know, only exists in 1 or 2 places, you know, we can't get that back.
Okay, I understand and I appreciate, and I believe that I can put my additional questions and concerns about that aspect into the comments that are due by August 13th. Thank you for the clarity. I do have one other question. As regards the Gateway Corner, I'm not clear. Has that been changed in the hybrid from what was being proposed? And I didn't hear any call outs, but I'm assuming they're still there in terms of permeable surfaces being retained or developed there that don't exist now, and bioswales, et cetera, et cetera. And also I'd like to know what the order of construction is in terms of, do you start at the beach, which is what I thought I heard now, instead of starting at the, you know, more on the north side, with creating landing zones and things like that for construction. So if you could just clarify that for me, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Sure.
To the extent that we can, Jamie, if the details are available.
Right. So in terms of the ordering of construction, I think the best simple place to look at that is there is a construction sequencing section in section 2 that kind of goes in detail what the plans are as of this time. But know that as design goes forward, those are going to certainly be refined. But I can answer very clearly and specifically regarding the Gateway Corner. Pretty much the Gateway Corner is almost the same for every alternative 2, 3, 4, and the selected preferred alternative 3A. The one exception is that if alternative 2 had been selected, which means the motel is gone, there would have been an additional building for a ranger or an employee residence at the Gateway Corner. So the Gateway Corner has not changed. And although you're not seeing in the graphics in this presentation, if you go to the FEIR and the DEIR, permeable surfaces are identified as intended throughout, and more refinements of those will be developed in the design phase.
Okay, thank you. Lloyd Ahern. Lloyd Ahern, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Lloyd Ahern, and I'm the president of the Las Tunas Homeowners Association. I've got a question. If you do not get permission from the California Coastal Commission, National Marine Service, and the Army Corps of Engineers to dump the contaminated dirt in the ocean, there was a suggestion that you may want to truck it out to a landfill. Are you aware that Malibu does not allow trucks of that size on PCH at any time unless you're delivering something necessary to Malibu? It would be impossible to get permission to take 12,000 trucks with 250,000 cubic yards with contaminated dirt across many freeways to a dump that would take this. How do you propose we get permission for this? Also, the reason I know this is your architect from Moffitt and Nichols. I just watched the tape, Rosie, where she said you're going to get rid of 250,000 cubic yards. I talked to a landslide expert today about how many trucks would that take. So I'm not making this up. It's absolute fact. So you got to deal with this. Give us a real strong answer on this.
Rosie, would you be comfortable responding to what the preferred alternative is proposing for the material management and our coordination with the resource agencies?
Sure. Hi, Lloyd. Thanks so much for asking that question. So yes, we are very much aware of the restrictions of moving trucks on PCH and through Malibu. We have looked at a variety of different alternatives. We don't have the final amount of material to be used, but I do want to clarify that it is absolutely not contaminated. It is native soil taken from the hillsides adjacent to the area. And we have done extensive soil characterization and testing to confirm that it is not, that it has no contaminants. The only contaminated soil that we have found is the top 1 or 2 feet, which may contain enough aerially deposited lead from when we all use lead-based gasoline that may require that to be taken somewhere else. All the rest of it qualifies for placement in the near shore for beneficial reuse. And we are working very closely with the California Coastal Commission and all of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers regarding all of this. So yes, you're absolutely right. Permits will be required. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to
Larry Weiner.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. You mentioned I'm representing the homeowners immediately adjacent to the west of the project. You mentioned earlier that there was a surf consultant that was hired for the surfers. We got nothing like that for the residents. These are residents who have basically put their life savings into these homes. Homes that, adjacent homes, which were damaged and removed due to previous storms. Yet we hired a consultant. Those consultants' concerns were dismissed by the designer of the project, who is apparently, as we learned tonight, has a financial interest because that consultant will continue to work on this project in the future. And I think that the residents deserve to have an independent consultant take a look at the hydrological studies. Also, as I said in my initial letter on this project, there is no stable project description. You are supposed to take alternatives that would reduce the impacts of the project, and you clearly did not do that. I have 2 questions for you. One is, will you respond to comments that you received tonight or before the end of the comment period? And 2, when is the public hearing on this before the State Parks Commission? Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I think I can take that on. There will be no meeting after this one prior to certification. The process that State Parks does with all of their EIRs is for the executive officer to certify the EIR. So your contribution to today's comment requests will be part of the public record, and members of State Parks are here listening to your concerns now, and will be afforded the recording for this public meeting. I think that answers your questions. We will not be providing responses to these comments per se, as they simply go to the public record in this process now, in this extended final EIR review period that's set up to review the preferred alternative. So thank you, Larry. And next we'll go to, I think, Ann Reddy.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, there you are.
Right.
Go for it.
The problem is you all don't live here. And what was glossed over was the 5+ years of construction. And what was mentioned was the 5 years for things to settle. You're talking 10 years from when you start to disrupt our lives and the lives of everyone who drives up and down Pacific Coast Highway. And I think it's a very grandiose project the state has come up with, and it does not take into account the culture of Malibu or Topanga or Topanga Canyon. You all just don't know what you're doing. And I think it's gross. Why would you, what is the purpose of having a bridge that is 5 times the one that's there? Who's going to be on the bridge? Are you having more traffic on the bridge? Why a 5 times bigger bridge? And then what happens if you run out of money? You clearly don't have the money that you need to do this. So what happens if you run out of money in the middle of things?
Is any more, Anne? Is that your comment?
Oh, a few more. That will do it for now. Let's answer those ones, huh?
Thank you, Anne, for that comment. I think the answer is that those effects of construction are certainly evaluated in the EIR process and disclosed through that period, including a 5-year construction period and ways of minimizing impacts. So we'll move on to the next hand up, which is Ali Acker. Trying to get you unmuted, Ali. Oh, you had it for a second. Is that Ali? I think you're muted on your end. Can you try unmuting?
Little microphone button at the bottom left.
You had it unmuted for a second there. Can you keep trying? I saw it flick on for a minute. Okay. Ali, we'll if you can you can stay with your hand open and try hand raised, and we'll try to get back to you. If you can figure out how to unmute yourself. Again, if you move your mouse up, there you go. Are you there? Try one more time. Or should we move on to, yeah. Stephen, let's move on to Chris. Chris is next on the list. Ali, don't go away though. We want to get you once you can, I think, unmute on your end. Chris?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So one of the specialists from Moffitt and Nichols did mention that in truth, during dry periods, that the creek will only breach 2 days out of the entire year in order for the allowing for the steelhead trout to migrate upstream. Through monitoring of this stream, we've also found that they've also found steelhead trout living well, apparently, even against all of these conditions that they've had to deal with over the last 100 years. I want to know if steelhead parks or state parks realizes that the Malibu Lagoon, which is less than 5 miles away from us, who was also a project to help the steelhead trout breach and go upstream. If they think that it is in fact worthwhile to disrupt for 5 to 7 years of PCH construction in order to help the steelhead trout do this on our creek for only 2 days out of the year.
That's good. Thank you, Chris. Not sure if there's a question there that can be answered, Jamie, about the purpose of the project.
I think the one thing I'll say is, although construction is intended to be 5 years. Work along the edge of the creek corridor is not 5 years. It's starting at the edge, staying out of the wetted width. And although, you know, Topanga is currently the only breeding population in the Santa Monica Mountains, it's a very different project from Malibu Creek's, the project at Malibu Lagoon. I would just suggest you take a closer look at the FEIR and look at that closely in terms of some of the response to comments we've provided on that topic, because there were other folks that asked that question as well.
Thank you. We now have a hand raised for a tag that says KBUU Studio Comp 2. Could you state your name and affiliation, please?
There we go. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
My name is Hans Letz, and I live down at Trancas Creek. And while I'm really a supporter of Rosie Daggett and her hard work for decades on this, I point out that CalTrans has been doing a similar project up here at Trancas Creek that was supposed to take 2 years. We're into year 4 of that right now. CalTrans at Trancas missed a communications line that went across the old bridge that had to be replaced. That was a 1-year delay. They then had another 1-year delay because of a design issue. And then they had a third 1-year delay because CalTrans did not conduct test borings in the middle of the creek. They conducted a test boring at Guernsey Avenue, and they conducted a test boring in front of the supermarket at Trancas. But somehow the state of California thought it could design a bridge without doing test borings in the middle of the creek that they passed over. As a result, these 60-foot deep pylons, columns that they sunk into the mud could not pass a stress test. That caused a 1-year delay in the project. They then had to redo those pylons down to 92 feet down into the mud. Now, CalTrans has been building bridges up and down the state since before my grandpa's grandpa was born. How could CalTrans make a mistake like those, where they missed a fiber optic line going across their bridge and they put the piers down half as deep as they needed? My question to CalTrans is, what guarantees will you give the people up at Topanga that they won't make the same errors that they just made at Trancas, extending the project by 100%? And by the way, we have a lousy little detour down here where traffic is supposed to slow to 30. There have been 4 crashes there so far. I can't wait to see how your detour works at Topanga, where the traffic load is 20 times as great. CalTrans?
Thank you for your comment. I'm not sure if CalTrans wants to respond to that.
Hi, this is Anna with CalTrans Environmental Planning. I don't have much of a response to give. I haven't been involved in the Trancas project, but we can note your comment about the delays in construction and issues that have been brought up that have affected the schedule. I don't know if anyone else has more to add to that response, but we will note it. And
thank you, Anna. I think that's a fair response. Appreciate the input on a separate project. We'll move on then. Leslie Watts is next in line.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm late to this party and I'm sorry about that. I am a Topanga resident for 42 years, and I was one of Rosie's students at UCLA, and I do thank you for all your work. But my question is, I don't understand why the motel court, I understand that it's a great historical value, but what about the Malibu feed bin, which is the last place of its kind, locally? How could they be accommodated? I think most of the community of Malibu and Topanga use them for supplying hay to their horses. And does anybody have an answer to that? I'm sorry I didn't hear the discussion earlier. It looks like the park, what do you call it, gateway, would be there. And is this team helping them in any way with the relocation or what's going to happen? So I'm done.
Thank you, Leslie, for that comment. Any input on our response, Barbara?
Yeah, Tom, I can take that a little bit. So that we've reviewed all of the structures there that are over 50 years old of age. Malibu Feed Bin was one of the structures that we evaluated. It does not meet the National Register for Historic Places criteria. There's a number of four different criteria that it should meet to qualify. One being important place of important historic event, associated with important historical figures, is an example of an architectural example of something. And the fourth is for information purposes. And in addition to those four criteria, they also have to meet integrity standards. So the Malibu the feed bin itself has been altered and over the years, so it does not meet the integrity standards, and it doesn't meet any of those other four criteria. As far as the business itself, then that's just for the historic structure, the structure itself. As far as the business, all those businesses are under lease agreements with California State Parks, and we will be following all of the language and contract language in those lease agreements as a part of this project.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm seeing one more hand raised, so I'm going to call on that person. Please, if you would like to speak tonight, go to the bottom of your screen with your mouse and click raise hand, and we'll see you and turn your mic on. So, Kathy Eldon, your time.
Thank you so very much. Yeah, honestly, I'm very grateful for all the work you put into it. It's a lot of hard work. But, you know, to be honest, we've lived on the beach. Michael's been here since the 60s. And honestly, we've been concerned about the stewardship of the beach for a really long time. The rising ocean, lack of attention to that, reefs, the erosion of the beach, the lifeguard station, which clearly is threatened. I have to say we are concerned about the ongoing stewardship, and we see that you're trying, but we are concerned. I'm also deeply concerned, and this is not about us. This is about the millions and millions and millions of people. I think it's 15 million who go through our gateway on their way to Malibu just in the summertime. Now, if you'll note that we had mudslides which took months to repair, teeny little, relatively small mudslides. And we had 45-minute delays to get to Santa Monica from our house and to Malibu from our house for months. Given the creation of an entirely new bridge that's nearly 500 feet long, I'm really wondering how you can say with a straight face that the millions of people using the PCH through this gateway will not be slowed down by the anticipated at least 5-year project.
Thank you for the comments. And again, the project review, the project described in the EIR had a temporary bridge that would be constructed first to provide for the maintenance of 4 lanes on PCH through a value-added engineering process. The idea was floated that the second bridge, expanded bridge, could be built, where the expanded portion would be built first without having to close traffic lanes, and then traffic would go on that portion while the other portion was being expanded. So the EIR considers maintenance of lanes of traffic, but thank you for your comment and concerns about maintaining reduced delays or minimized delays. Next comment is Kelly Fry.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Fry, and I also am a volunteer with the Sierra Club Santa Monica Mountains Task Force. And I just want you to say this is a great project, and I'm really looking forward to the outcome. However, when the one gentleman mentioned earlier about the mistakes that CalTrans made, it did bring up something that was disturbed me this year regarding the Marvin Road bike trail in Santa Monica that went over the Santa Monica Channel and the Rustic Creek rivers that come together and come out at Rustic West Channel Road. It broke off. It just opened last year, and it broke part of the newly opened bike trail broke off and fell into the channel this winter from erosion. And I do want to say that I do have concerns about the quality of the structure. I did make some phone calls. It was the state, the county, a gentleman from the county called me. I believe he was a ranger, super nice guy, had no answers for me. And I never really did get any other calls back from the city. So I just want to say that I am concerned just because of what happened to the Marvin Road bike trail in Santa Monica at the Rustic Creek and Santa Monica Channel Creek entrance into the Santa Monica Bay.
Thank you, Kelly, for that comment. You're referencing a project that we're not entirely familiar with, although those of us who use that bike path are aware of what you're talking about. And so that's not part of our project, but the complexity of building infrastructure on the beach is a fair comment to raise. I'll go to the next person in line. And I think this is Ali Acker, who had been trying to access before. Ali, can you, or Allison, can you hear us and get yourself unmuted there? There you go.
Can you hear me, Tom?
Yep, absolutely. Welcome.
Wonderful. I had to switch because good old Verizon in Topanga Canyon wasn't working so well on my phone. So switch to the laptop. So much better now. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I am Ali Acker, a 63-year resident of Topanga Canyon and the advisory member appointed by the Board of Supervisors to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. So I saw the original plans and we reviewed them in great detail and the environmental impact reports. And I must say, I'm really pleased with this hybrid approach, the 3A. It is much better than the original plans, and it's taking the best elements of these other plans. My one question is, and I'm really glad, and I'm most thankful for preservation of the motel, because it is really a part of local history and it would be lost to time, and we have so little history left in our area, and it's nice the idea of preserving a small portion of it, especially because it can be used by the public at large. And that's really my question is, in addition to the motels, what other available resources will be available to the general public? Because we really have a dearth of available opportunities for Californians and visitors to stay economically in our area. Staying at $700 a night Airbnbs isn't really the answer. And so my question is, what else is going to be accommodated in this space, if any?
Thank you for that comment. And I think that there is there are options on the table, and there are aspirations and additional assessment of what could occur. But I will defer to Barbara or John if you wanted to comment about the future amenities to be provided by State Parks in the Gateway Corner and the rest of this property.
Sure, I can. Well, as far as the motel, I can just note that the final Use has not yet been determined. It can be either a combination of low-cost overnight accommodations, some interpretive elements. That's all still kind of to be worked out during the design period. I think Rosie had talked about some design charrettes in the future to get additional feedback for that. And then the gateway corner will obviously have some public amenities such as like some interpretive area. There'll be parking. I don't remember if there's picnic locations or not there. Maybe John can weigh in on that. But the idea is for that space to be kind of a welcoming area so people know that it's Topanga State Park, that they don't know now, and provide some background on the area.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks for the comment on low cost affordable motel arrangements. One more hand up, just Barbara. No last name, Barbara.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Can you state your name for us?
Yes, sir, of course. Barbara Burke from Malibu Times. How do you do? Appreciate listening in to this. A couple questions. The chat doesn't work apparently during recording, and the attorney who spoke doesn't know who I am. So if he could reach out to Barbara Burke at Malibu Times, I'd like to find out more from him. And anyone else is, of course, welcome to do so. I had the specific question, sir, concerning the reference of you need two, if I understood, you need 2 more years of studies with your regulators, and you're going to have conversations with them. Could you comment and educate us on how we are going to know about how those narratives are going and whether there'll be public hearings as to those regulator related conversations and decisions?
Thank you, Barbara. And I think we can provide some brief response. There is a period of permitting that is required for this process and project implementation that follows the CEQA compliance process. So right now we are in the CEQA compliance process, and we have forecast the needs for certain permits for certain elements of the project. And so we will be pivoting, the project team will be pivoting toward providing the information with a better, more final project description. In other words, that where the design goes from a certain percent completion to a more final completion that is needed for those permits. And that process can take up to 2 years, we're anticipating. Yes.
And this is Jamie King. So just also to provide a little more clarification. So permits will be required from the Coastal Commission. They'll be required from the Army Corps of Engineers. They'll be required from CDFW. All of those types of permits typically have some sort of, for example, for Coastal Commission, there's a public hearing where the project is at least listed for notification to the public where people can comment. So most permits usually have some sort of public element to them. And so those will be available as those occur. But we can't go and submit requests for permits until we have a fine-tuned project, which has to go through the design process.
There will also be some additional meetings that will be held that will be open to the public to support the design ideas. And so paying attention to the website for when those opportunities arise will provide for more public input. Okay, I think that's, we've got Gilbert Dembo has raised his hand again, and Gilbert, we'll let you speak again if you've got another thought, but we wanted to limit coming back for a second comment, but I think we can do that because that's the only comment left. Gilbert, do you want to talk? Are you there? We are not able to hear you, Gilbert. Are there any others that,
Can you hear me now?
there you are, yes.
I just wanted to remind you that 90% of the beach users at Topanga Beach are surfers. They have surfboards and and it's dangerous to cross the highway. That's why you have to put more parking on the beach side rather than the other side. You cannot reduce the parking that's there. So you have a big safety problem with people crossing PCH, and especially people carrying surfboards. So your users are not the typical beach people, they're surfers. And that's what you have to, put in your reports.
All right.
That's it.
Thank you, Gilbert, for that comment. And I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Anyone want to raise their hand and provide us comments on the final EIR for the Topanga Restoration Project? And now I've opened up the door to repeat comments. And so I will honor these two comments that have just raised their hands for repeat comments, but we'd like to be succinct, please. So Larry Weiner.
Yes, good evening. I'll try and be succinct. You mentioned that the state executive director of the state parks and recreations will be considering the draft EIR. Will he also be considering project approval, or will project approval simply not include the State Department of Parks and Recreation?
I will answer that and say yes. That's project approval is also part of that state parks responsibility as lead agency. Thank you, Larry. Anne, ready? One more shot at this.
Yes, thank you. Would one of you address the 5+ years of construction and the 5 years after that for the impact settling? That's 10 years, and I'd like one of you to address that because it was mentioned tonight and then glossed over that you're talking 10 years of our lives and of the traffic going down PCH.
Thank you.
Rosie, could you take that, Rosie?
Yeah, and I'll just start by saying 5 years is the construction period. The monitoring won't be impactful to the traffic. It will be ensuring that the plantings are successful, and any weeding that needs to happen is really mostly what the 5-year period is about, the habitat management plan. But Rosie, if anyone else wanted to add to that.
John?
Hi, yeah. So, Anne, thank you. Because I think this was something that I mentioned that might be getting wrapped up in this, and that is when the surf consultant was looking at potential impacts to surf conditions, there were some temporary impacts that might take 3 to 5 years to settle out of the system. That's just related to sediment coming out of the lagoon and potentially changing how the surf breaks. As soon as construction is over, that would be the end of the construction related impacts. It's not related to that 5 years that I mentioned. So it should just be those 5 years of disruption, not 10. And apologies for the confusion on that one.
So I'd like to jump in and clarify on that. Actually, the surf consultant did not think that there would be any impacts to the surf that were of any consequence. The sediment deposition and changes are a result of the fact that there's been a lot of sediment stuck further up the creek that hasn't had a chance to get through because of a variety, the constraints of the current bridge. But back to the question, Anne, that you posed, is that I think as Tom mentioned, the construction is really hopefully only going to go 5 years. And thanks to Hans for pointing out some of the concerns that arose at Trancas. We've worked really hard with the engineers and with CalTrans to identify every possible thing that could create any kind of delay. And as we go forward in this design process, we will be calling on people to come and help us at each milestone to help refine this further. So collectively, I think we're going to be able to hopefully avoid some of the mistakes and delays that have occurred in other places. But yeah, five years is what we're hoping is the absolute worst case scenario. Hope that helps. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rosie, for that input, and thank you for those comments. We have a hand raised by Greg Young. Greg, are you there? It looks like you're unmuted, Greg, but we can't hear you. Can't hear Greg. I think, Greg, you just tried to mute yourself. Keep trying there. We don't have any other hands raised at the moment. Would anyone else who hasn't already spoke like a chance for another comment? Greg, I see you've unmuted yourself, but again, we can't hear you. Okay. Not seeing any other hands raised. Certainly able to go to the Topanga website, and maybe we could show that link one more time before the meeting is closed here for folks to be able to get in touch with this project team. There it is. And I think, Greg, I we're just not able to hear you with the setup. And I do think it's on your end there since it's been working. So I keep trying, but I don't see any other hands. And we have one more hand just raised from Leslie Watts. Again, a repeat comment. Leslie, can you keep it brief, please? We'll go ahead and try that. Leslie, you need to unmute.
Yeah.
There you go.
Am I unmuted? Okay. Another concern is if there's construction there and we're evacuating during a fire, how would that be handled? Topanga.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. There's extensive discussion about that in the final EIR.
Okay.
And the concern is was raised in the draft EIR certainly, and in the responses to comments as well. So several mitigation strategies for maintaining emergency evacuation routes would be imposed during the whole construction period, as well as operationally.
I'll just jump in and say, Leslie, that has been a huge part of the whole conversation. And we have worked closely with LA County, with TSEP, with all the evacuation folks, the city of Malibu's evacuation plan. And during construction, there will be, things would shut down for construction so that evacuation could occur. And that's been a very big concern and something that we've looked closely at. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, appreciate the comment. So that's it. Greg, I'm not sure if we should try one more time. Your hand is still up. I'm not sure if your system is going to accommodate us, but here we've opened you up again. Can you unmute and join? No, hand is down now. Okay, Greg. I know you're listening to me anyway, it sounds like, so I really appreciate you being here. And you can find our information on the website for providing any input into the public record here for consideration by the state parks to certify a considered certified and approved project for the Topanga Lagoon Restoration Project. And with that, I think it concludes our public meeting today. And I want to thank everybody for participating. Its input is incredibly important to the decision makers, which is what this process is about. So with that, I think project team, shall we just close that out? Does anyone have any closing statements? Jamie, or are we good to go?
I just want to say we very much appreciate all of your attendance as the public and as our political representatives, and we look forward to your thoughts and ideas as the project moves forward to make this the best project possible.
Okay, and with that, this concludes our meeting, and thank you for joining.